Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Hypergrowth, the podcast that's dedicated to unpacking what it takes to build a rapidly scalable e-commerce business. I'm your host, Arjun Jolly, co-founder of Ad Quadrant, and joining me today is John Roman, the CEO of Battlbox. Battlbox is an e-commerce brand that provides their subscribers with a monthly box of outdoor, survival, and everyday carry gear handpicked by their team of outdoor experts. Their company does north of 20 million in revenue, and they even have their own Netflix show called Southern Survival, and they've been known to take their customers out to shoot tanks. How badass is that? John, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
So, John, just to kick us off, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, BattleBox, how you got started? What's the story behind what you're doing today?
My background is not, this is technically my third career. So to my parents' extremely positive feeling about it, I after university, I decided I was gonna play poker professionally. So I did that for about 4.5 years. After that, went into sales. So entry level sales job, or at that point I'm 5 years older than everybody else, so really had to grind that one out and had a lot of success with it. And the better part of a decade moved into simply building B2B sales teams, so technology, software, typically, by the end of it, Fortune 2000-ish companies, targeting the C-suite of those types of entities, and did really, really well with it. It was definitely the career I was going to stick in. And in late 2014, early 2015, I started investing in companies that were crossing my network. I've always been a big believer in spending time working on your network and increasing the size of it. So I had a weird stint where a dozen opportunities in a very short period of time, all from different parts of my network, had crossed my desk. Battlebox was one of them, and I instantly knew I had to be involved. And I was pretty naive at the time when it came to my investing criteria. Basically, I would just invest in it. And if you look at the probably roughly, I think, 7 investments I made at that time, the other 6 went to zero. Battlebox was not the case. So invested and became a partner and got involved in BattleBox about a week after it officially launched. It quickly had momentum. I found myself burning from both ends, where I had my 9 to 5, and this was my 6 to 12 every day. And I finally, about a year in, our run rate was going to be in the 8 figures, and I had to make a decision. So I joined full time, and the rest is kind of history.
So it started, sounds like, as a bit of a side hustle, right? As you like, it's interesting because you took that VC approach, right? I mean, you swung 7 times, 6 tanked, no pun intended.
Mhm.
One succeeded, and that one was something that you got involved in, started as a side hustle, and did that full pivot, right? Going into it as a
Right.
full time career.
Yeah, and that was not necessarily the plan that for me to get as involved as I did. The original plan was limited capacity. I would give maybe a couple hours a month, more like business advisory, advisement consulting, and quickly realized that somehow my B2B sales skill set somehow was correlating to the sales and the marketing side. I was taking kind of a similar approach, and it was working. So I quickly was inheriting sales, marketing, customer experience, um, and it blossomed. It was never the intent, but then I found myself actually enjoying it, which became a problem, because if you enjoy something, you want to keep working on it.
Awesome. So you've seen ecom before the pandemic, through the pandemic, now post pandemic. Um, I'm curious to get your thoughts just in terms of, from your lens and having been in the space for as long as you've been, there's been all these changes, especially in the past couple years. what are you thinking about on a day-to-day basis, and what's keeping you up at night as you think about where we're at today versus, let's say, where we were at in 2020 or 2021?
Sure. So yeah, 2020, 2021, e-commerce was easy. Especially right before the iOS thing. Like literally it did not take much. And arguably what might be a product market fit in today's climate might not have been today in today's climate, might have been back then, right? People were stuck in their home and just buying anything. Didn't even have to be a good ad. And what keeps me up at night now, what I'm most focused on is the community piece, the value add in connecting with our customers. You look at and I've spoken about this before, where our offering or anyone's offering falls on the need want scale. And consumers' behavior has consistently shifted through the years, with the slight anomaly of the pandemic, where they want to connect with a brand, and the farther it is on the want side versus the absolute essential need side, the more important it is, where that consumer wants to feel some sort of connection. And the writing on the wall of that being the case is there in front of us. You're looking at these, for lack of better words, celebrities or influencers that have done a really good job with social media connecting with their fans, and now they're launching brands and they're just instantly successful. There's the people that started on the content side, like Mr. Beast, who's launched multiple instantly successful brands. And then you look at the Kim Kardashian or the Kardashians in general, multiple that have built, they've taken their celebrity, their influence, and they've parlayed it into the business. And both have, two of them have one with a, you could argue, $1 billion valuation, whether that's still the valuation or not, significantly in the nine figures though. And you look at Kim Kardashian, who her brand, they're talking about it going public and it being the IPO that the actual market needs, which is wild to think of, but the economics are there. So you're seeing it from that side and then reverse engineering it, going the opposite of how brands go. But I think it's just further validation that you have to connect with your consumers. And it is of the utmost important. It's more about just the product. It's about the experience.
Yeah, I think that makes total sense. It's that I think the need want scale is a crucial thing to consider, and really just having that value first mindset, right? To make sure that you're creating value, whether it's tangible or intangible value. It's the emotional component as well that the consumer feels on the other end, right? But I am curious to get your take on something here, John, on the basis of what has taken place in the last couple of years. We're coming from a grow at all costs type of market, right? And I think that, to your point, e-commerce was a bit easier during the last few years versus where it is at today. What's your take in terms of, what founders of e-com brands need to think about from a shift in mindset in terms of how brands were operating in, again, let's say 2020, 2021 versus 2023? What's that shift of things they need to consider, things they need to look at then versus now?
Think the big thing is depending operators, founders, there's a few different doors that they can go, right? They can try to bootstrap it themselves. And I think if that's the approach you're taking, not much has changed, in the sense that if you're bootstrapping yourself, you care about profitability, right? You're caring about growing, but not at all costs. If you jump to the other door, where it's the, hey, let's just grow at all costs, right? We have 20 million. We only need to worry about 6 months of runway. Let's scale and raise another set of money at that point. That's all changed, right? VC PE money, it's extremely tougher to come by now. And it comes with terms and conditions and covenants that are scary. But that's even if you're getting an offer. I think watching the correction of the last couple of years for direct to consumer ecom, it's not an easy path. So I think if you are going the path of raising, I think at this point and profitability probably was always in the equation, but you're caring a little bit more about it than you did before, right? It's not acceptable to go the route of we'll figure it out later, right? Or using some napkin math that, yeah, we'll just stop spending in 5 years and it'll all be profitable. That's it was kind of given validity before, um, without necessarily the right reasons.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And the other thing I would just add is that you're seeing a lot more brands pay attention to not just their direct consumer online presence, but what's taking place offline and how they can integrate themselves into an offline retail aspect as well, right? And then determining how do you really bridge that data? How do you leverage IRI data? How do you, really measure the endpoint of that consumer across those different channels, be it offline and online, and really marry that story together. So it's interesting for sure to see that there's a bit of a divergence that's taken place in terms of the type of brand and how they operate. To your point, you might have that hardcore D2C brand where absolutely, if they've got that bootstrap mentality, they've been focusing on profitability since day one. And then on the flip side, you've got the brands where they're looking at that growth and market share and integrating more than just online channels into their strategy and really figuring out how they navigate that.
Yeah, no, you're spot on. Direct to consumer is a sales channel. It's not necessarily a business in its own accord, right? Like, you're seeing a lot of the, and I'll use this word semi loosely, but thought leaders in this space, really they're focused on the other channels, right? Which is wild because not a lot of people were, you go 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago, everybody would be like, ew, actual in-person retail, disgusting. But
Brick and
now,
mortar.
yeah, why would I ever do that? And now that's part of the strategy, right? And it's an interesting piece because to get into retail at scale, it is very, very expensive from a cash flow perspective, right? You're having to manufacture, take the cost of that, and a lot of the big box retailers and traditional retailers, they have some pretty one-sided terms on how they're going to pay and how much they're going to pay. It really is a volume game to get, profit of significance. So it kind of forces you to possibly have either a really strong D2C channel that can support the growth, or looking at actually raising or borrowing.
Yeah, for sure. It's you look at the let's just call it a poster child brand like a Liquid Death, right? I mean, they've done
Yeah.
amazing things online and offline, and they've grown to massive scale. But you also have smaller brands out there. An example of one would be, a D2C brand called Live Tinted, which is a makeup brand for individuals of different skin tones and complexions. And they started D2C, but then they started expanding into Ulta early, right? And they're taking that as a part of the overall strategy, so that they're kind of everywhere to everyone in their audience cohort, but kind of everywhere to everyone. And they're meeting consumers where they are rather
Right.
than assuming they're going to capture the consumer online only and assuming that's the only place they are, right? And again,
Right.
maybe that was the case when we were all locked down in a pandemic and we couldn't shop as we normally would. But now things, I think it's just it's opened everybody's eyes to a slightly different strategy. And John, even for your business, I mean, it may not be considered offline retail, but you've got a Netflix show, right? So let's talk about that, because ultimately that's not a direct to consumer sales channel, but how did that even come about, and how is that impacting the business?
Sure. So it definitely to this day still impacts the business. I was looking at our post-purchase survey data this morning in a report that I get, and it's still, I think it was in sixth or seventh place, and we're pretty diversified on our lead sources. On But where did you first hear about us? The Netflix show. So it was a process. So Brandon Curran, who's the face of our brand, he started off as just doing reviews, paying for our boxes. Um, we quickly put him into our influencer program, and then from that, the relationship grew, and we made him an offer to come on full time as the face of the brand. So shortly after he came on full time, we really upped the amount of content we were um, putting out every single month, and it caught the eyes of a production studio called High Noon Entertainment. Their two feathers in their cap are Cake Boss and Fixer Upper. So um two shows that honestly in some capacity or another involved a brand. So they were definitely speaking our language. They shot I don't even know if this is still a term, but a sizzle reel, which typically you take and you shop to get money for a pilot. So they shot a sizzle reel with us, took it to History Channel. History Channel sat on it for 6 months, said no. They took it to Discovery Channel. Discovery Channel sat on it for 6 months, said no. And they're simply asking for the money from one of those two networks to film a pilot to then have to ask for money again. In 2019 January, so this is over a year at this point. We've been working on it, about a year and a half since film. They took it to Netflix in January 2019. Netflix, basically in the meeting said, "Yeah, we'll do it. We'll do this. We don't do pilots. We're gonna give you the money for the first season, and we want right of first refusal on the next seven." And it was off to the races. We started filming in the second half of 2019, for about 6 months. Came back in January 2020 and filmed just some miscellaneous scenes so that everything was tied together the way the editors wanted it to be. And then complete radio silence, crickets. Netflix is not fun to work with because they were a business and they're viewing us purely as talent, which the questions we're asking, they don't even, the people we're talking to don't even have the answers. Which was frustrating, but I get it. They're a gigantic, corporation. But fast forward, July 4th weekend 2020, the show dropped, and it definitely changed momentum for us. We were in the middle of the pandemic, which was amazing time for e-commerce, and even a better time for a company sending survival outdoor gear. So it was perfect timing. Leading up to the show, we were getting about 125,000, 130,000 unique visitors a month on our site. In July 2020, we had 1.2 million unique visitors. Now it's not like, oh, we 10x it, so we 10x the business. The reality, that traffic did not behave in the same manner as targeted paid traffic. It was a much different buyer, but some of our ideal persona, ideal perfect VIP customers were in that mix too. So we definitely saw a massive uplift.
So how did you measure that? And I understand. I mean, obviously, there's the aspect of running the campaign and then looking at site traffic, coinciding with the dates that the show is airing, et cetera. But what about, to your point, the purchasing journey, right? How did you look at the measurement around those consumers and the difference in consumer behavior of the traffic that was being generated from the show versus a direct response paid ad on Instagram or search or something like that? So would love to just unpack that. What was your strategy there?
Yeah, so it was tough. The most tough part about it was leading up to his forecasting, because there was no case study, there was no use case on a scenario like this. The closest thing we could find was the TV show Duck Dynasty, where they had the duck calls they were selling.
Yeah, yeah.
And but the fundamental problem with that is they were on traditional TV where there was a new episode every week. So it was a slow build. While this is, 8 episodes of 30 minutes a piece, 4 hours, especially in the pandemic, that's a night. You're going to watch that in a night. So there was no real data to suggest how to forecast, how to plan. So that was the biggest thing. Um, Once we got past that, yeah, and the traffic's tough to track too, because you're really just looking at Google traffic, both paid and unpaid, because people are searching for you after watching the show, and then direct traffic. So really search paid and direct is where we saw this huge uptick, and where 99.9% of the uptick was occurring. So it was really easy to understand it. But yeah, it did not behave the same way. A multi-touch approach is what worked best. So the reprospecting, retargeting campaigns that we would traditionally run for a much smaller period of time, we were running for a longer period of time and still seeing uplift from that extended run. Um, Even at its best, conversion rate was only about between a third and a half of traditional paid traffic, but it was a one-time purchase. It We saw a nice uptick in the subscription side, but a lot of it was they were buying something from the show that they saw, and then it was, they weren't going to convert for another 90 days as we slowly marketed to them, slowly sent them links to content and explained what our community was about. It was a much, much, much slower sell. And um it wasn't like we knew what we were doing per se, right? We were just trying to put ourselves in the eyes of that new consumer, and trying to, we had a few different ways that campaign could go based on behavior, but really just trying to be not salesy at all, because people don't like to be sold to. There's a place and time to really ask the hard questions and ask for the business and give a promotion, but for the most part, especially someone that's watching a TV show for their enjoyment, um, they don't want to then immediately be hammered by that brand. So it was a much slower sell.
Interesting. So it sounds like there was probably an element of a reduction in customer acquisition costs just based on the nature of how the customer was acquired, but LTV for those consumers was not as good as the LTV for a consumer that you would go out and capture yourself via paid ads.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting.
Converted at about half the rate. LTV was between a third and half of traditional LTV. So they weren't. Now you take out, though, you go into a cohort of that influx, and they were our ideal customers. Um, Obviously the mean brings it down, because there were a lot that had no intention of buying, no intention of getting more than ever getting the $10 thing they saw on the site. So there's a lot of data in there, but in there was a sliver of the most perfect ideal customers who just hadn't heard of us
Were
before.
you running post-purchase surveys for those one-time purchasers as well, and getting an understanding of just kind of who they were that way?
Yeah. So the post purchase survey, a couple of ways. One, we use software on the front end for attribution, since attribution is a nightmare. It's checks and balance on that. Just trying to see from a different source if we're seeing the same trends, that this channel is working better than another. Other than that, it's where our focus is on the content side. So if we see that we're, TikTok this month is leading the way, and the advertising dollars don't necessarily state that is the truth, in the sense that, yes, if we're spending 80% on TikTok should be the majority lion's share of the post purchase survey data. So when we see the differences, we know we just have to take it up a level and produce both quality and content, quality and quantity content on those channels. So like right now, we're struggling a bit on Meta and TikTok, but we're seeing YouTube, where we advertise very little, leading the way for us. So because of the advertising struggles, but the post purchase survey data is showing YouTube, so we're increasing the frequency of some of our content currently on YouTube, kind of leaning into it a little.
Yeah, that data is crucial for that, right? To even just identify which channel and what approach to take on that channel. I think it's really easy for ecom brands and founders and just D2C marketers to look at it and say, well, that ad didn't convert. That ad is the ROAS is bad. We need to turn it off. Is that really the case? Because maybe you're actually you're mining in the right field, but you just have to take a different tool to it, right? You have to take a different tool towards how do you capture that? What's the angle? What's the approach? What's the creative? What's the content look like? And even what's the skew that you're marketing to that audience? And rather than operating only off of assumptions, it's hypothesis testing, right? It's
There's so many
continuously
variables.
so many variables, continuously testing. But then, to your point, bringing that data in, right? Like run those post-purchase surveys. Make sure you're engaging with your customer after you've actually acquired them. Get an understanding and almost build, if you can, a customer 360 map, like, leveraging a CDP or otherwise, build that customer 360 map, know your customer and know how to capture that cohort of audiences. But getting back to metrics, because this is such an important point for the listeners. Um, Customer acquisition costs are rising.
Yeah.
Subscription box brands, one of the hardest things for them is not only customer acquisition costs rising, but then maximizing LTV. I want to understand your take on this. What's your approach and your strategy to navigate these two challenges, coupled with iOS now 17, I think, point 0.5 around the corner, and all the privacy things. Like, what's your take in terms of just customer acquisition, retention, and really weaving it all together to succeed even in this rapidly changing environment that we're in?
Yeah, so customer acquisition costs in 2015, I wish I knew what I knew now. We were
Don't we all?
getting Yeah, we were getting customers for less than $5 a piece. Um, Now, we're in a short 8 years later, we're going, um, I'm screaming from the rooftop, scale, scale, scale. When we find campaigns where we can get customer acquisition costs of $80 or less, like go, like spend until the diminishing returns. So I don't care how much, we'll figure it out. And it's really changed. We've cared about customer retention and worrying about churn. We made it a huge priority back in 2019, in 2020, when it wasn't cool. No one really cared. Everybody's like, oh, just get another customer. Now, of course, the minds, everybody's like, oh, it is. Oh, I've heard a million times through my life it's easier to keep a customer than get a new one. This is what they meant. So it matters. So I think as long as you can extend the life cycle of the customer, it's huge. There's a million different ways to skin the cat. We're currently testing automatic discount, where we're just reaching out to them before they churn, because we know that's a tough spot after that third order, stating, hey, you don't even have to do anything. We've added this to your account. Here's a credit. Your next purchase, it'll come off the top. Um, we don't have enough data yet on it. We're probably 2 months away from having enough data to at least make an educated guess on how the data finishes. But little things like that, little additional touch points, that any brand can do just to engage customers. We're looking at, while we don't have enough data on the that 3 to 4 month span, we're already talking about doing a 12 to 13 month span, or 12 to 13th order span, where we see another slight dip. And then we're going to run both of those in conjunction and see.
So awesome, man. It's such a cool strategy. And I think, going back to our earlier part of the conversation about bridging offline and online and just different ways to get in front of your customer, experiences like that are just, it's such a great way, not just to solidify your stance with those customers that are getting the experience, but also the audiences they reach as your creators and influencers as they're talking about it and hyping up their experience, right? So just such an awesome experience. Also, really happy to hear that your swag bag was valued at what it was versus the conference swag bags, because I can't tell you
Yeah,
how many of the damn like hand sanitizers and little foam tchotchkes I got. So good on
yeah.
you for having solid swag bags.
Thank you.
So, John, we're wrapping up today, and I think this was awesome. The listeners are, I'm sure, going to take a lot away from the show. But just before we close out, what's one piece of advice that you would like to give to fellow D2C ecom founders as we navigate the coming years ahead?
Um, I think that when we talk about the coming years, it's interesting because the end part of that is a much greener pasture. It's going to be some challenging years where we're going to continue to not only have customer acquisition issues and retention issues, but larger economic climate issues, right? And I think if you can just hunker down and care, get back to the basics, listen to your customers, try to retain your customers, surprise and delight, and you can do it all profitably through this window. I think you're in such an amazing position when you get out of it. And I think legitimately so many opportunities are going to be out there from both customer acquisition to potential acquisitions yourself. I think there's a lot of opportunities or mergers in the next couple of years, but the other side of it, it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be great when the economy is rebound.
For sure. Awesome advice, John. Thanks so much for the time today. It was great having you on the show. I know our listeners are going to love a lot of what you talked about. Definitely a unique take on everything from the Netflix experience to the tank to your marketing strategies. So really appreciate you joining
Different.
us today. To everyone tuning in and listening and watching today to Hypergrowth, thanks again for joining us, and stay tuned for the next episode of Hypergrowth. Take care. All right.